And all these are interwoven. Today is also related to Buddha, the Purnima today and tomorrow. So Buddha also is a great presence of liberation. And the struggle of Buddha or Buddha's sadhana to include women. And though it has a complex history, but Buddha was deeply respectful for women. And so, with these two living presence with us, so we are nurturing our conversation today on biography, history, and creativity, glimpses from a life's journey. So, in which we invite Dr. Betty Govindan, who has been associated, she has worked at University of KwaZulu-Natal in Durban, and she is also associated now with the university. And she is also associated with many important social movements and creative efforts in South Africa. We have other friends who are present today, so we welcome all of you. And now I invite Dr. Betty Govindan to kindly make her presentation. You wanted to share a PowerPoint. So if you are with the computer, you can use the screen to share screen to use the PowerPoint, please. I am making you a co-host.
If you could help me with the images, that will help me at this end just to go through my text.
Okay.
Thank you.
So you kindly email it to me, please.
I sent the email to you.
Achha, okay, I'm just checking on it.
You can check.
In the meantime, you can kindly begin, and I am looking into the yes.
And if we miss the images, I can send it to the participants later. But it's in your email. Thank you.
Yes,
thank you, Professor Anantagiri. Thank you for this invitation. And I really appreciate our friendship and our collegiality. And thank you for visiting me in Durban and breaking bread together. It's been a very special encounter, and also to be invited to speak this afternoon. It's 5 o'clock here in South Africa on these auspicious occasions when we remember the birth of Buddha, and we also remember women across the world and all those in mothering roles. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, please. Yes.
Yes. I think there was a little note that it's not audible. Shall I speak up louder? Is that better?
Yeah, it is all right. Please kindly go ahead.
Yeah. Remember to remember. Let no one say the past is dead. The past is all about us and within. This is by Udarug Nunakau, an Aboriginal from Australia. The time will come when with elation, you will greet yourself arriving at your own front door, in your own mirror, and each will smile at the other's welcome. And you will love again the stranger who was yourself. And that's by none other than Derek Walcott, who, as you know, was a Nobel Prize winner and from the West Indies. And so here you have in these epigraphs something of the way in which we leave ourselves and go on a long, winding voyage until we find that we are coming back to ourselves. And this is the perennial, the eternal search for home. South Africa is the country burdened by race. Being born and growing up in a ghettoized apartheid system with its rampant racial segregation, I have been on a perpetual quest to reimagine the world, to balance sameness with difference, to increasingly explore across the imposed fences, the terrains of mutuality in our common life, working both within, against, and beyond apartheid racial categorizations has been a continual challenge as I've engaged in different ways with the fractured and conflicted socio-cultural and political landscape that South Africa is, through my work in literature and literary criticism, in history, and in other transdisciplinary spaces. This yearning is a deeply sacred endeavor for me, a yearning for our collective crossing over from exclusion to embrace. And you'll recognize there the work of Miroslav Volf, now at Yale University, but from Croatia, and the longing for us to move, indeed for the entire world, the entire planet, to move from exclusion to embrace. And what does that mean? And as Bell Hooks, the US Black feminist and social activist, and one of my mentors has urged, such a journey compels us to a continual mapping and remapping of identity, to redraw a cartography of the self and other. Are you fine? Can you hear me? Do you want it louder?
Hear you, please. It is fine.
It's fine. Thank you.
Thank you.
I grew up in Kersney, a rural village in Natal in South Africa. If you check the map, it's beyond Durban and Stanger. And when I turned 6 in 1950, I'm 81 now, I began my initial primary schooling there. I then continued in Stanger, 6 miles from Kersney, where I completed high school. It is a sad indictment of institutionalized apartheid that I was not afforded the opportunity to study with students of other race groups throughout my entire formal education, from primary to secondary and even tertiary levels. I began my university education in 1963, the year before the landmark Rivonia trial in South Africa, when Nelson Mandela would be incarcerated on Robben Island for the next 27 years. From studying at a tribal or bush college, we called them bush colleges because they weren't in the center of urban areas like the other well-known universities were, for example, UCT and WITS, but these were bush colleges that were created in the rural areas, far away from the urban areas. And so although we were in this discarded military barracks in the center of the Durban Bay, we still called it a bush college because of the connotations of separateness and marginal and peripheral location. And so there I was exposed to positivist fundamental pedagogics, a conservative Eurocentric and patriarchal orientation to our curriculum. And I slowly grew to breathe Fanon's prayer in different ways over the decades. People like Fanon were banned and were not read openly in South Africa at that time. In fact, Fanon was well known in the early 60s before he died. And his prayer became mine over the decades. Oh, my body, make me always a woman who questions. The irony was that because of and in spite of Salisbury Island, my real education began when I left the island. And it was in the space of the same, what we called historically Black universities, as Salisbury Island morphed into the University of Durban Westfall, where much of my critical thinking developed. My subsequent scholarship gradually expanded, traversing postmodernist, post-structuralist, post-colonial, anti-colonial, and decolonial thinking, as well as post-humanist thinking, and all interspersed with many strands of radical feminist critique. Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart, I actually taught this text, introduced it to students at the university. Things Fall Apart with its indictment against the pacification of natives, earned by careful scrutiny. Achebe was unequivocal. Nobody can teach me who I am. You can describe parts of me, but who I am and what I need is something I have to find out myself. So this kind of imposition of pedagogy and of theory was something that we constantly rethought. Ngugi wa Thiong'o became a constant signpost, also pointing to the imperative to decolonize the mind. And in my travels during those decades, going to Nairobi and going to the University of Nairobi was an especially moving experience for me, the place where Wa Thiong'o lived and honed his own critical thinking on decolonization. My first ever overseas presentation was in the late 1970s on the role of the writer in Africa at the African Literature Association conference in Claremont, California. It was good to meet compatriots such as Dennis Brutus. Dennis Brutus was one of our foremost activists in South Africa. He studied at Fort Hare and was a friend and comrade of my late husband. And it was very good to meet him at the conference. And he came back to South Africa in 1990. I've written a poem on him when he died. Against the background of broad feminist excavatory work and a passionate interest in post-colonial, Black, Indigenous feminist writings from all over the world, I realized that the corpus of South African Indian women's writings was a neglected area. Much of our work in feminist work has been excavatory. I found this in New Zealand when I visited, in Australia, in the United States, in Canada. Much of the work has been about excavating, unearthing all the suppressed writings by women. And this is what made me begin to realize that at my doorstep was a body of work that had been neglected in South African literary criticism. And this is the book that then developed out of my study. And if you read the first few chapters, you will see a very concise and detailed exposition of South African literature and the way in which South African literature and the canon became systematized, and there was this exclusion of South African Indian women's writings. And that is how I began to develop that whole understanding and theorizing around the women's writings. And it's the first of its kind. We've had subsequent writings, and it's become we've become far more aware of this corpus of writing. But at the time when I did it, it was still an emerging field. The trope of home, born out of alienation and displacement, but also embodying grace and grail, emerged as a defining theme in Sister Outsiders, where I saw the women writing back to the beloved country. So these were all women of Indian origin, had their origins in indenture and in the passenger Indian history. And as much as they saw India as their ancestral home, they were writing and expressing a deep longing to belong to the land of their birth, belong to South Africa. And this is the poem I wrote to summarize their longing. They refused the longing for ancestral shores, but carried their homes on their backs. They refused to be tongue-tied, manacled and gridiron, living in the false cocoons of the oppressor's lies. They refused to mirror back the grotesque images of apartheid law that corralled body and mind into allotted spaces. Living and writing against the grain, they did not see freedom's cause as a choice or even a vocation, but a deeply felt moral responsibility. They still have much to teach us today. And so much of their writing is about this longing for home. And the phrase carrying your home on your back actually comes from David Aberdeen, whom you know is from British Guyana and now a professor in England, but writing about, again, as V.S. Naipaul did, writing again about this longing for home and where is home, and constantly being on this journey, on traveling in a literal, but also in a metaphorical sense of trying to find home. And this came through strongly in my study. Sister Outsiders and two further collections of critical essays, A Time of Memory, Reflections on Recent South African Writings, and Words on Water, Reflections on Writing, were written in the season of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa, when we were negotiating our different pasts in different ways. Indeed, the scripting of memory in multiple ways has marked the post-apartheid scene. As Ankie Krog, the Afrikaans South African writer, says in Country of My Skull, she's writing about South Africa, Country of My Skull, and she was very involved in the work of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. I am busy with the truth, my truth. And this is one of her books that she has just published now. It's her own autobiography, again, searching for where she belongs. And as Archbishop Tutu observed in his foreword to my book, A Time of Memory, Archbishop Tutu wrote, "Memory and truth are to be seen as two sides of the same coin." So memory becomes a very important component of the searching for home. This refusal of amnesia is crucial, but is also counterpoised with creative amnesia, so that the past is not cast in stone, but the past is generative and regenerative as we begin to produce the past and reproduce the past in creative and critical ways. And this is the earnest project of healing the wounds of history. And time doesn't permit me, but I've written extensively on the way in which writing has been used. Poetry and prose and literary writing, autobiographical and biographical writing has been used in healing the wounds of history. And this is true around the world. Crucially, in these critical reflections on a wide variety of writings in South Africa, and I've included South African Chinese writings. When the book, the autobiography by Daryl Oconee was published, I immediately went to secure a copy and began reading it. He was very gratified with my review and my essay on it. And I've shared it in different parts of the world. And I was saying in that review and in that critical essay, this is my story. The Chinese history is my story as a South African. And you will, as you will know, the Chinese also came to South Africa as indentured laborers. And given the way in which the apartheid system worked, there was not much interaction amongst us. And yet we have we share a common history in South Africa. I underlined the multiple inheritances that make up South African society, that these writings reconfigure not only the canon, but the national imaginary. And to this day, this is my burning quest. How do we think of ourselves in terms of the nation? How do we describe and tease out what it means to be nation? How do we think of ourselves as community in South Africa? Community, ironically, has always been defined in unilateral and enclosed terms. How do we begin to redefine community in a way that opens it up? And we know the way in which borders work, both within the nation and globally. How do we understand community and the human community, the continental community? This is something that continues to be a challenge. Through my engagement with the Indian women writers, I haven't had time to expand on it, but I could at another stage. I also developed a robust appreciation of the influence of Gandhi in South Africa. As I began working on the different women in my study, and I have distinct chapters on them, I wrote on Olga Parekh. She's a woman of Jewish background who married into a Durban family, a Parekh family in Durban, and identified with the Indian experience. Ansuya Singh was a lawyer and writer in Durban, and she wrote for the 100th anniversary of the arrival of Indians in South Africa. She wrote a novel called Behold the Earth Mourns. And there was Fatima Mir, a well-known activist, a writer, an academic, and an intellectual. And if anybody encouraged me to work on Indian women, given that there were times when we saw this as an ethnocentric type of study, it was Fatima Mir, because during the apartheid era, the subaltern literatures and subaltern writings, and I've written a lot about this in the study. As you know, Spivak has influenced us in this thinking. Fatima Mir was saying we are engaging in a double kind of exclusion by refusing to write about ourselves, write about our histories, write about our women. And so in many ways, this was a freeing from the way in which apartheid bound us. These women were all active in the passive resistance movement in South Africa. And that, of course, is a story for another day. My writings on Gandhian themes emerged from this, from the discursive writings, the critical reviews, and poetry that I then engaged in. It emerged from my work on Indian women's writings. And I also reflected on Gandhi's impact on literature and a century of politics in South Africa. To mark the centenary of Satyagraha in 1913 in South Africa, a colleague and I edited a collection of essays on Gandhi. It was called 1913. We did the study in 2013. The study was entitled 1913, Satyagraha, Passive Resistance and Its Legacy. And we edited a collection of essays, myself and Professor Kalpana Hiralal, who I hope is listening in at the moment. And so I'll share two poems with you that I then wrote. I've written several poems and many essays on Gandhi from different perspectives, some on Hind Swaraj that was published in different spaces. I've also written critical essays on criticism of Gandhi, and I could share this with you at another time. So this is the poem I wrote, which is called Savodhya. I became very interested in reminding ourselves that Savodhya is the twin of Satyagraha. And Gandhi was very explicit about how the welfare of all and the strategies of nonviolence go hand in hand. It's not just about marching for freedom and marching for a cause. It's also about how Satyagraha is lived on the ground. So this poem is entitled Savodhya. Unto this last, I give the same as unto the first. He who worked from the first hour is equal to he who worked from the 11th. Both meet in the dignity of work and in the dignity of pay. The gift of bread for all is the bequest of peace for the world. And so you will see there echoes of the parable that Jesus told of the hired workmen and how all of them received the same, those who started at the beginning of the day and those who came at the 11th hour. You also see the influence of Ruskin and the way in which we must work for a radical equality. Not so easy, but that is the challenge. Then what was groundbreaking for me about Sister Outsiders was that I included the story of my grandmother and my personal links with Indian indenture. So I was also teaching in the cohort to doctoral students at that time at the University of Durban, Westville, and we were learning a lot about research methodology and teaching our students about research methodology. And one of them was about the rationale and why are you doing the study? And what is it about you and your own personal background that is essential to the study? And this is when I thought of writing about my grandmother as an oblique way of writing about myself. And thankfully, at the time when I was doing this, my mother was alive. And can you believe it? Here I was, a grown woman with grown-up children. And that was when I began asking my mother about my grandmother. I knew about her from the family anecdotes, but I began a serious investigation of my grandmother's life. And this has changed me. It's changed our whole understanding of our family, of the place where we lived in Kersney. That place has become ever real. And during COVID, I wrote at length about this place. It was going back to the place of my birth, literally and figuratively. So what was groundbreaking for me, apart from learning about Gandhi, was to learn about our histories. And this has been, and I've been in this quest now for all the grandmothers around, was that I included the story of my grandmother and my personal links with Indian indenture. So it wasn't out there. It was something that was part of me. Having been subjected to the apartheid educational system in South Africa, I was initially deprived of exposure to Indian indentured history and literature. So at school, I studied the First World War and the unification of Germany. At university, I studied history, but it was always history of the other. And I was initially deprived of exposure to Indian indentured history and literature from a critical post-colonial and decolonial perspective. And sensitive to apartheid separatist categorizings, I myself avoided in past decades, any introspective gaze, having anxieties over the racialization of scholarship and ethnocentricity. And as I mentioned already, people like Fatima Mir were arguing against such diffidence. Fatima Mir taught at the University of Natal, which was a largely white university, and she actually instituted the Institute of Black Research. And their Black research and Black consciousness was an inclusive term, where we studied all the Black groups. And so here was Fatima Mir saying, do not collude with your own exclusion. However, as I said, people were arguing against the diffidence that we were feeling and pointing out that Indians were part of the oppressed groups in South Africa. And scholarship and writings on Indian history highlight the different types of oppressions under apartheid. Fatima Mir's own work simultaneously assumes separate identity and deconstructs notions of separateness in a delicate balancing act. And I understand that it's not always easy to maintain this delicate balancing act. In fact, we do see in the new South Africa, 30 years down the line, retreats into lagers of ethnicity. We see retreat into racism of different kinds. But this is the challenge of how we work in us with our histories and also work for the commonalities across the divides. Achille Mbembe, I have one of his books here. He's one of our noted African intellectuals. Achille Mbembe, he is a professor at Wits, and he comes from the Cameroon, has presciently articulated it when he said, it is our differences, paradoxically, that we must share. It is our differences that paradoxically we must share. And he's written a great deal about the challenges of the post-colony. The impetus towards indenture histories and writings in South Africa has gained momentum in recent decades and has been particularly palpable since the democratic dispensation, from freedom to cane fields. So from the freedom of 94 back to the past, to cane fields, to transpose the title of Professor Uma Dupilia Mestry's book. She's written about from cane fields to freedom. So in many ways, the irony and the paradox is that from the present, we're going into the past in different ways. And these are a variety of pasts, as I'm suggesting. And I constantly appreciate in new ways the injunction offered by Professor Njabula Ndebele, another towering intellectual and African scholar. He was previously the Vice Chancellor of the University of the Western Cape. I met him just a few weeks ago at the Simonstown Literary Festival, one of our great writers, and towering and fearless intellectual. Professor Njabula Ndebele says, in retelling our past, we learn to move away from spectacle to rediscover the ordinary. A very simple formulation, but it comes with profound truth as we begin to explore the everyday, the ordinary, rather than just looking at the macrocosm and the large swathes of history that we were inclined to believe was history. That's why, and when you go back to the domestic, the lived, and in his writing, he has a book, Professor Ndebele's book, called The Rediscovery of the Ordinary. It's about the daily, the mundane experiences that then are seen as history. And I've written about this elsewhere as well, where I've given portraits of a spectrum of women and looking at the ordinary in their lives. Accordingly, I return to the place of my birth, literally and metaphorically. I return to the womb, and I'm quoting here, we are born somewhere. If we can, we take to the road to see the world, as they say. Spend years out there sometime, but in the end, we return to our point of departure. And so I don't know if it's just about one's getting older. I'm now in my 80s, but I think it's also the kind of circling back to your beginnings. And T.S. Eliot talks about this as well, and going back to your home and seeing it there for the first time. And so I think with the benefit of years and the benefit of reading and the benefit of reading other people's stories, you go back in this cyclical way and see the past in a new light. And so I write now about myself, having gone through this journey away from my past. I am a child of indenture. I was born in Kearsney on the north coast of Natal in South Africa, some 60 miles from Durban, the seaport town along the Indian Ocean. It was on the north and south coasts of Natal where the early sugar plantations were developed through the work of Indian indentured laborers. Although indenture was officially abolished in 1917, the aftermath of indenture was to continue in different ways. We lived in the barracks. In the essay, I have the picture of the factory and the part of the barracks, the remnants of indenture life that was close to the old tea factory itself. The place was called Old Factory, and a few miles away was New Factory, where Hewlett's, this was the name of the colonial firm that worked in sugar and in tea. And it's a well-known name here in South Africa. The Hewlett's there had a grand palatial home, and we could see it from our barracks home. My maternal grandmother came with her parents and 3 brothers and 3 sisters in 1904 from Nellore in Andhra Pradesh in India, where she was born in 1896, a year before Queen Victoria's Diamond Jubilee. My grandmother's youngest brother, Basavir Moses Thal, had actually been born on the ship en route to South Africa. And so my grandmother comes as a child laborer around 7 or 8, begins working on the tea estates in Kearsney. And I write about how young women were seen as being particularly suited for this work because they were seen to have small, deft fingers. And we know how factory work continues to this day in different ways. My mother told me that my grandmother worked for $1 a month. She did not receive any formal education, but learned to read the land, as Vijay Mishra, the well-known Indian diasporic scholar based in Perth, has stated. It's interesting, and I write this in my larger research, at the time when my grandmother came and other indentured laborers came, the way in which this bolstered the economy of Natal and the way in which private schools were inaugurated at that time after 1860. And here was my grandmother who never went to school for a single day. When she moved to work in the nearby mill, my grandmother's job involved turning the leaves, spread out to dry on the shelves lined with hessian, and then scaling and packing them for transportation by locomotive to Stanger and then to Durban, the main seaport town. Ships then took this cargo to India, where the leaves were processed and blended into Ceylon tea and exported to different parts of the world. My grandmother was thus a small participant in the larger capitalist enterprise for the mother country, Great Britain. If you went to Kearsney today, you will see the ruins of the old tea factory where my grandmother worked and the barracks nearby where I was born. And again, I have pictures in my essay on this. Having crossed the Kalapani, and I've written a lot about the Kalapani and the seas and the oceanic experience, my grandmother never went back to India, living in a state of familiar temporariness. And isn't that true, as it defines our own existential lives? Familiar temporariness, as V.S. Naipaul says in A House for Mr. Biswas. And my grandmother became part of the large company of permanent sojourners in South Africa. And in many ways, and I would like to conclude with that in a while, we are permanent sojourners on this planet. So South Africa, the land of her adoption, became her home. Indeed, up to the time she died on the 13th of January, 1948, on my 4th birthday, she never knew the rights of a citizen, nor did her daughter, my mother, who was born in the land of her birth. I first voted for the first time in the land of my birth. My mother died without having the right to vote. My mother was born in this country. My grandmother died in 1948, and she would have at least known Indian independence in 1947 if she remained in India. And I voted for the first time with my grown-up daughters when I was 50 in 1994. I have some pictures here, which I will share at another stage. In this poem for my grandmother, and I'll read this poem, composed a few years ago, I go like Alice Walker in search of my grandmother's garden. This ritual is both inward as well as outward and expansive. It includes my enduring quest for my many grandmothers connected across time and space. Among them, Sojourner Truth, Mary Prince, Udguru Nunakau, whom I quoted at the beginning, and the first two, as you know, were slave women in the United States and in England, excuse me, Rosa Luxemburg, and I've written about these women. Eva Kratoa was one of the first slave women in South Africa. Saki Bartman, Fatima Mir, Dr. Gunham, Phyllis Naidu, and I connect my work in Sister Outsiders with the other foremothers. As I contemplate who I am and where I belong, and listen more intently to the ancient songlines that connect us all across time and space. And so I'll read the poem from my grandmother. But if anything, I feel connected to the women from across our histories, across the worlds and the continents. So this poem is for my grandmother. And I imagine going back to the old tea factory and imagine going through these ruins and seeing the spirit of my grandmother linger there. The old tea factory at Kersney, Natal. And this is the picture of my grandmother there on the right. The light streams through the cracks, haunting lines, specters, shards of memory, dancing patches on the crumbling walls, sunlight on a broken column, derelict and silent, stone bodies on the coolie lines. A sad, lonely mango tree, a neglected hibiscus, marigolds under the thicket, choking, and pride of India in need of pruning, only the eternal bees and butterflies. Your sari hitched to your waist, you toil from morning till sunset. The open spaces of the hills and dales, your allotted prison under the African sky. Nimble fingers picking leaf by leaf by leaf, you become lettered in the ways of the fields, reading the hills and dales, writing your name in the wind, wafting it across the seas. The lush green hills of leaves hoisted up, spread out to dry on shelves lined with hessian. You turn the leaves hour by hour by hour to catch the rays of the African sun. You work for a shilling a month. You look wistfully at the rows of wooden boxes filled with leaves, dried, drained, to begin their journey across the billowy seas to the soil of your heart, your hearth, your home. The leaves, you finger, you see your fingers fingering the leaves, the African sun sealed within. Your hands reach out to the boxes, the boxes. The light streams through the cracks, specters, shards of memory, moving patches on the crumbling walls, sunlight on a broken column. All is derelict and silent, stone bodies on the coolie lines. A long shadow is cast over the hills and valleys of Kersney, abandoned by history, across the Kalapani to the hills of Bezwada in Andhra Pradesh. The river Krishna, flowing old and languid, catches images fleeting of the old tea factory under the African sun, dancing on the waters over hills and valleys, windswept with longing, my spirit forever entwined with yours. I have come in search of your dreams, growing in your garden, submerged in air, under the African sky. And so I continue in my story of some of the stories. I go back in time to some of the stories that I heard in my childhood. And among them is the story of Pandita Ramabai, and our friends from India will know much about her and her story. I've written several essays on Pandita Ramabai and also went to the Mukti mission and attended a conference there. I also write about these were all texts that were brought across the Indian Ocean, brought by my family members. And these were the texts that we read, and I have copies of them now. And then there was the story of the basket of flowers, but I'll skip that. These were all carried across the Kalapani, across the Indian Ocean, in their Jahaji bundles, as they were called. And in these bundles were sacred texts, Bibles, the Quran. Our writers have written about this. There were seeds that were brought, mango seeds, tamarind seeds, and I've written about that as well. And there were also books that were treasured, that were brought. And so I'd like to end with the reflection of my coolie odyssey. My coolie odyssey, initially emerging cautiously, hesitantly, set me on a rewarding and illuminating learning trajectory. In these journeys, I have many odysseys. My odyssey into African literature, into feminisms, and my odyssey into spiritual thinking as a person born into the Christian faith, and my work in interfaith women, among interfaith women as well, has broadened my understanding of our collective lineage and our collective heritage. So my coolie odyssey, initially beginning cautiously, hesitantly, set me on a rewarding and illuminating learning trajectory. In these journeys, I have become one of Amitav Ghosh's Laskars. And you'll know Amitav Ghosh is one of my favorite writers because he also writes of the expanse of the travels, connecting slavery and indenture, connecting histories across epochs. And Amitav Ghosh writes very much about the subcontinent before its borders and partition. Adrift on the Black Seas, I feel like one of Amitav Ghosh's Lascars, adrift on the black waters, the Kalapani, at once belonging and not belonging, moving between terracentric forays, earthbound forays, and transoceanic voyages, being led by the stars across the southern sky, which has writ large the imprints and reflections of crisscrossings of slavery and of indenture, of negritude and coolitude. And this is something I've written about and continue to do. Floating, haunting capital. This is the capital that we inherit. This is a haunting capital with our memories of the past. The title Haunting Capital comes from Hashimi Bana, who has written about the ghosts and the specters of slavery that continue. She's a South African and now a US scholar, about the ghosts that continue to haunt us in our collective search. And this is the floating, haunting capital on the expanse of the waters below. And this is the important position and positionality I've come to. This is for me, in the end, the compelling diasporic consciousness. And this is the way I want to define and redefine diaspora. Unfortunately, we have created fences around diaspora. The word diaspora means dispersion, but we speak of the Indian diaspora. We speak of the African diaspora as if there is no interweaving. And there are many other diasporas, the Chinese diaspora, the Jewish diaspora, and there are multiple diasporas, given the way in which migration has taken place. And they all intersect. This is, for me, in the end, the compelling diasporic consciousness with its dislocations, forever dispersed, buffeted, scattered in the gales of continents, in the currents of colonies. That phrase from Karl Taraboli, the Mauritian and French scholar of indenture and coolitude and negritude, has been a haunting phrase in all my work. I refuse to corral, to ghettoize, I refuse to corral the coral imaginary. The coral imaginary is about the oceanic imaginary, forever afloat, forever moving. Something of that perpetual voyage in and voyage out is captured in the poem I composed to mark the 150th anniversary of the arrival of indentured Indians to South Africa. And at the very heart of my many discursive meanderings on indenture is the incessant need to belong, yes, to belong to the nation, to return to my native land, yes, but also to recreate in the Fanonian sense our single planetary home, so deeply riven, so precarious. And I'll read the poem before I conclude. So this poem was written in 2010 to mark the 150th anniversary of the arrival of Indian indentured laborers in South Africa. Tumbling from the great ghats in India to the holding places in Port Natal, ushered in by the capricious tide, crossing the Kalapani, children of the rain and storm, buffeted by waves, stitching fragments of self patched together in the waters of the voyage, finding anchors in the wind, fated to be vagabonds of identity, their histories sinewed to their bones, tilling in coolie cane fields, learning the language and law of foreign shores, toiling for tea for empire, castaways, stone bodies and compounds, preserving the ancient heart with laddus and rasgullas, the remembrance of things past, lighting the family god lamp with suppliant hands, watched by the stars, working with new kith and kin for freedom to sprout on parched ground, mingling blood and water to forge a new people, a new heaven, and a new earth, heaving the sheaves of yesteryear, this harvest of memory, new beatitudes for our time and place. And I'll read one more poem that I composed recently when we celebrated the 163rd anniversary of the arrival of indentured laborers. And I wrote this after that occasion, and I shared it last year in November at another commemoration on the Durban beachfront. And again, I am suggesting the particular, the historic, and the way in which this merges with the cosmos. We gather at the water's edge, the milky, and this is called marigolds by the sea. And I haven't got the photo here, but we actually offered marigolds to the sea as a collective sacred gesture and a ceremony. We gather at the water's edge, the milky sky above beholds the human tableau as the wind blows sands in our faces and the incessant waves waft in, waft out. Ancient sea histories wash across the shore, mingling with histories of the land. Billows of sugarcane heaving, breaking, crashing in motion. We gathered today to offer marigolds to the Indian Ocean, the seas that churned our ancestors to this land, scattered in the gales of continents, in the currents of colonies. Our oblations of gold are buffeted by the waves. Our histories crash, collide, merge as seagulls fly. We of the earth and sky and air and fire. Our homage of gold, flotsam and jetsam under the heavens, ceaselessly rising and falling in the sacred dance of remembrance. Friends, I'd like to suggest that our journeys into our particular lives and our particular histories, with all its challenges, is in the end to create one world. And Professor Anantagiri has spoken about, in the end, the non-duality that pervades the cosmos, that pervades our religious thinking, that pervades the sacred, and the way in which we should embrace that in our lives, in its particularities, in its specificities, in its histories, and in the way in which we recast the collective. You will agree with me that we need this now more than ever before, as we seek borders created within borders, as we create borders within nations and borders across nations. You will appreciate that this is something we need more than ever before. And so I should like to conclude with just a few lines from Tagore. This book I carry with me wherever I go, and continue. I've also written about Tagore if you would like me to share some of my thoughts at another stage. But I'd like to just share Tagore's vision and Tagore's hope and Tagore's prayer for how we should live in this world. The very first lines of Gitanjali. Thou hast made me endless, such is thy pleasure. This frail vessel thou emptiest again and again, and fillest it ever with fresh life. This little flute of a reed thou hast carried over hills and dales, and has breathed through it melodies eternally new. At the immortal touch of thy hands, my little heart loses its limits in joy and gives birth to utterance ineffable. Thy infinite gifts come to me only on these very small hands of mine. Ages pass, and still thou pourest, and still there is room to fill. My prayer, and I'm sure this is our collective prayer, in order to create the gardens of God, we have to enter into that spirit of openness and infinitude that is at the very depths of our hearts and at the edges of the cosmos. If only we can understand the largesse that we have been given and the largesse that we can express and work for and build for, we will truly create gardens of God here and now and in the years to come. Thank you.
Thank you so much with my and our heart, Professor Betty Govindan. And what a profound journey, your journey and across generations. In a way, the generations are also little seas we cross. And then the oceanic spirit and history, poetry, creativity, participation, struggle, and many sources of inspiration, from Gandhi to bell hooks to Fanon, and many contemporary writers. So we are deeply enriched by your presentation. And also, what a great learning journey, and all of us seekers and of human life and society, we would study deeply your work in our community today. We have also many dedicated learners, I could say. Professor Purnima joins, she has worked on women's movement and many others. And so we are grateful to you. Now I invite Minati to nurture the conversation. And as we move along, we have our respected friend present from South Africa. So I see Professor G.V. Pillai in that name. Is it correct?
Yes.
So let us first invite Professor Pillai, please. And after that, Minati, you can kindly invite other our participants. You nurture this part of our conversation. Please, Professor Pillai and Minati, you can coordinate the conversation. Yeah. Right. Then we have Charles Debruk. Is it correct? No? Charles
Yes.
Debruk.
Yes.
So we invite you, please, Charles Debruk, to kindly speak. Please unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you very much, sir. Thanks, Prof. Petty. A very informative presentation once again. I'm just particularly interested in one dimension. As you know, I think the colleagues here in this forum are not aware of it. I'm busy with similar research of mine on the on Indian musicians in South Africa during apartheid. I just wanted to find out during the course of your work, how do you deal uh, with issues that are very disturbing during apartheid that you write about it today? When we are so distant from the actual occurrence of these incidents. For example, the oppression and the riots, and example, the pain that your mother must have underwent, in 1948,
Yes.
being
Yes.
denied, the space to vote. How does one get
Yes.
around like that. I'm not so
Yes.
sure if I'm expressing myself very clearly, but that is one of the
Yes.
challenges I'm finding with writing today as well. Thanks.
Yes. Thank you. I have written extensively on Ronnie Govender and Kate Mann, and the whole issue comes up there. And Ronnie is the classic example of balancing those different histories. Ronnie himself was a victim of the group areas removal from Cater
Yes.
Manor. And he writes about this. And this was the 1949 riots as well. And so, in many ways, the histories are multiple because after Gandhi had organized the passive resistance movements and the NIC. The NIC, I've written this in other places, continued from the early 20th century right up to 1994. It was a legitimate anti-apartheid organ. And the NIC, and as you know, the United Democratic Front worked, men and women from the NIC, the Natal Indian Congress, worked in the UDF right up to 94.
Yes,
and it was
correct.
seen, so the way, even though there was the Indian tag to the NIC, it continued to work in non-racial ways. The same with the Black consciousness movements and
Yes,
their work. And so in many ways, the whole ideology of divide and rule had unfortunate consequences, but there was always this attempt to work against them. And we also had, we've written about the tricameral parliament as well of the 80s and 90s. And that the kind of rationale that went with that. So it's balancing, it's a delicate balancing act, but it's putting it all out there. And when you read how others have written about it, certainly people like Fatima Mir and the work of the Institute of Black Research, you begin to understand how it's not ignoring, whitewashing the history, it's presenting it with all its fault lines. And what are the lessons we can learn from that? It's the same in the way in which we do scholarship on Gandhi and John Dewey and all the others.
Thank you, Prof. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ananta Bhai. Now I request Professor Purnima Jain to share her reflection and thoughts. Professor Purnima Jain, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity. I was overwhelmed by listening to Miss Betty. It was so philosophical. It was so
my
philosophical.
My name is Devarakshanam.
It was so philosophical. I thought only Professor Anand Giri is only philosophical, but when I listened to you, I thought there's another person also who is so philosophical and so authentic in the field. Thank you very much for your deliberations.
Thank you. My name is Devarakshanam. It means God salvation, God protect. Yes. And Betty was given by my mother's midwife, and it became my nickname. But my name's Devarakshanam. Yes. Thank you.
Very good. Very good. Nice to see you virtually.
Thank you.
Thank you. May I invite next M.Y. Mushahar. Please share your reflections and thoughts, please. M.Y. Mushahar.
Time there was a hand by Daisy Pillai, Aminati. You can kindly take note.
Daisy, if you want to speak. Hi, Daisy.
Hi, good afternoon to everyone. Sorry, I just want to put my phone off. Okay. And now I'm speaking from my laptop. To my dear friend Betty, who's also my mentor and my colleague, thank you very much for inviting me to this evening's presentation, which is, I think, especially important because we're celebrating Mother's Day, and you are a mother to us in many ways because of the kind of leadership and mentoring that you afforded us over the years. I've not really, I was so engrossed and entangled in the presentation because of the way in what it was presented. I think what I'd like to comment on is the weaving of the personal narratives in relation to the historical narratives, and the way you brought in the different authors to read your stories into their stories and their stories into yours was fascinating. Whether it was Anki Krog or Ghosh, I love the way our lives are entangled in the lives of others in such profound ways. And I found I found your presentation in that way very, very almost bringing me to experience your experience. I've never went through, and I was not born in the time you did, but I spent the latter part of my learning with you. But in telling your stories the way you did, in sharing the photographs of Kearsley, in sharing the artifacts, and the way you've entangled both man, the human, the non-human, the beyond human, in such an interesting way, I think made this presentation really come alive.
Thank you.
I became part of it. I started to feel it, and I think that's powerful. And I think I want to make a comment here in relation to curriculum and how your presentation is what I think our everyday lecture rooms should be about. And I think I want to comment on that as well. I think your presentation about the everyday, the mundaneness of life, that is where that is so fertile for recreating ourselves. I think it needs to happen more and more. We tend to rely so much on codified knowledge and on prepositional knowledge that we forget the richness and the potency that lies in the everyday and the mundaneness. And I think what your presentation then calls on us to do is almost to ask, what's our ethical orientation at this in all of this as academics, as scholars, and as academics at universities? What should our lecture rooms feel like? What should it be like? So that everybody leaves the lecture room moved. We are all moved by your presentation, Betty, because of what happened in the hour. Yes, you shared your story, but you also shared so many other ways that you invited us in. And then we became part of the experience. And I think everyone leaves here shifted in some ways about something. And for me, that begs a curriculum question around how should we understand curriculum? Is curriculum then a space for becoming? Should every student that inhabit our lecture rooms experience each lecture and every lecture as a space for becoming? So I'm actually wanting to provoke your presentation to ask about what we do daily, but what we do as academics in our lecture rooms, and how do we create this kind of experience where learning can happen in the way it is. So that's my comment. And well, in some way, some nudging about how do we want to think about curriculum now, and what is our ethical orientation then as academics. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Daisy, and thank you for your comments. You've been my mentor. And this quest has been shared quest that we have pursued. And you're absolutely right. I've written elsewhere, as you know, on the way in which we need to break down the walls of the ivory tower, and the way in which, remember that poem I wrote related to the new common sense when Professor Torres visited us. But I think the challenge is definitely how we allow the outside to enter the classroom and how we allow the classroom to enter the outside. And if ever we needed that in South Africa, we need it now. We understood it in different ways over the decades. In the 60s, when I was a student, in the 70s and 80s, and post 1994 into our democratic era. But we need it more now than ever before, 30 years on. It's an absolute challenge for us in the universities and in the teaching spheres to see, and we can see how critical thinking is under threat and how easy it is to retreat into lagers. And yet the planet, the world, humanity, and the rest of the planet needs this kind of openness and this entanglement that makes us truly one. That is what the cosmos is about. It's a challenge that we have to constantly work towards. Unfortunately, the university and the educational sector is on a different trajectory, and we're constantly having to meet demands of that sector, as it were. And even though we talk about the need to have impact on the ground, and you raise the whole question of the ethical dimension, that's absolutely crucial. Thank you.
Thank you. May I request you to just take all the notes of all the participants, and at the end you can just together can sum up and answer, ma'am. May I invite now M.Y. Moshood, please. He has raised his hand. Okay, as he is taking some time, now can invite Dr. Susri Sangita Misra. Please, you can share your comments, your reflections.
Thank you, Minati. And a profound thanks to our speaker today. An extremely engaging and very insightful. Minati, am I audible?
Yes, you are very good.
Okay, thank you. So, thank you, Sapeti.
Susriappa, please open your video if possible so that we can see you. And that request also to Dr. Daisy and Dr. Charles later. You can kindly open your video, would like to see. So please continue.
Okay, yeah. So, yeah, I'm trying to open it. It is... Okay, let me complete my thoughts. So, before, an extremely engaging and interesting presentation. Love the way I, sincerely appreciate and actually learned, I would say, the way you, laid the personal experience and connected that to deep social and philosophical queries. Love the way it is weaved together, which is what made this, the entire presentation so engaging, deeply, overwhelming, I would say, as Professor Daisy was saying. This is something that we should, as a pattern of speaking or teaching, can be explored, that whether this is something really extremely not only interesting, but also deeply penetrating. So this is one point that I wanted to say before
Thank you.
I get into the subject. And then, as when we are speaking about non-duality, I think you pretty much covered many things. I felt inspired by all the poems that you read out to us, and also by the poem that you quoted from Gitanjali. So I would, in that context, probably recite few lines of one of the poems that I had penned down, which I think would be probably in line with what you spoke towards the end of your presentation. So here goes, and the title of the poem is "As the River Flows." Stones lie quite beneath, each one edged with 1,000 currents. The push and pull of time, a secret rhythm buried deep where the river hums. Stones lie quiet beneath, each one edged with 1,000 currents. The push and pull of time, a secret rhythm buried deep where the river hums. One note bends to the next, the water never fighting its shape, only yielding, only flowing, a language of murmurs, translating silence into motion, a whisper turning into a wave, and then back again. Is this what harmony does? Is this what harmony does? It makes you both the ripple and the river, the silence and the song. So
Oh,
with this, I thank you once again. I will try to open. Thank you. I'll try to open my video. I'm not able to. I don't know.
And could you please share your poem with us through Professor Giri? We would love. Oh, there you are.
Oh yeah. Okay. So it was
Thank you so much.
absolutely enthralling listening to your presentation. Once again,
Thank
I must say this. And a very valid point which Professor Daisy said, that this pattern of speaking and teaching also is something that is subject, can be researched more.
Yes.
This is not only interesting, but also, very high impact, deeply impactful and penetrating. So with this, I will rather listen to other speakers. And thank you once again. Thank you, Anandavai. I could manage.
Yeah, now may I invite Mr. Ashish Gupta? Okay, his audio is not connected to this. Mr. Ashish Gupta? Okay, his audio is not connected here. May I invite Sandhya Giri to share some of your thoughts? Anantabhai, no one else has left now.
You please share your thought, and then Masur Sahib. Salam alaikum, Masur ji. Please, you can speak. First Minati, then Masur, please.
Yeah, thank you, Anantabhai. I was just listening to all the discussion and Professor Vitti's presentation. It was quite interesting, and a mixture of philosophy, life experience, poetry, and all these. In one thing, I was just wondering. I don't have much experience, but we have a family friend that is also the same stories like what she shared mostly. That is he's now in Port Elizabeth, Professor Loganath Athlum. You must be knowing also, I don't know. He teaches in Nelson Mandela University in Port Elizabeth. I mean, when they visited India, maybe around 20 years back with his father, just in a conversation that uncle was sharing, his father traveled to South Africa as a petrol bunk worker. And later on how they evolved, and now he works for the South African children, and he helps the people with the education and other social activities. And he was sharing, that what you said, the conflict, the longings, that what Professor Biti was telling. Even our own Meera Ma'am, when she shares about that refugee, how they came from Bangladesh to West Bengal, in many, I feel it is all threaded in one garland, like the pain, the what you say, the longingness, everything is same, like and I must mention Professor Bitty's the poetries are really inspiring and very, I mean, even though your presentation was also poetry in motion, I should say, I must say. So these were very interesting, and we learned a lot of things. um, Looking forward to read some of your books and gain some more knowledge. Yeah, and thank you for very this insightful presentation. I don't have any. I mean, I have just a simple query. I mean, when we were not into this academics, or just going through the in the childhood age mostly, what were your thoughts about those conditions, and the what you say, the pain and suffering, or the acceptance? Would you share a little bit more about from the childhood days, like how it was? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Minati, and thank you for your sharing. I would love to connect with you personally and send some of my other experiences. But for a long time, one accepted that this is how reality was shaped, and you thought that's how it should be, until you began to become far more self-aware and become more critical, and you began to understand the injustices that were meted out to you. My father, I've written about him as well, worked to his dying day. He just accepted that he was born to work, and he worked all the time from morning till evening. And it was something that he thought was his destiny. And so you don't understand how history shapes your destiny, and you learn to accept it, and then you begin to realize there's a gross injustice in your life, and you begin to protest and to seek other realities. When you're presented with the reality, my grandmother lived with the reality she was given, but then there were others who began to say life doesn't have to be like that. It's the same about being women and the way we've been socialized and schooled into what a woman should be and do, until you question that and you read how others have questioned it. And you begin to negotiate at different stages how change and revolution could be effected and can take place, and how you could also undergo a transformation yourself, and how you could change the way others think. And in many ways, women were in the forefront. I have expressed this in my study, the way women were in the forefront across the racial spectrum, across class and caste and religion, in the forefront in South Africa. And yet for a while that was accepted until one questioned it. And there are other fights and other struggles and other injustices that we didn't appreciate and understand in the earlier decades, which we appreciate and work for now.
Thank you. Anant bhai, any closing remarks from you?
Now, our respected Masoor Bhai is here. So, Salam Alaikum, Masoor Bhai. Please unmute and say. Masoor Bhai, please unmute. Please unmute yourself. Yes. Yes, we can hear you.
Giri Saab and Minati and other our friends who have arranged this inspirational and very fascinating lecture by Betty Govindan.
Thank you.
While I was listening to her lecture, I began to believe that she must have been a very affectionate teacher, actually, classroom teacher, and very, very humble. And she must be say the master of the art of motivation. How she pictured us, all of the listeners. And the story she told us, I think that is not only her story and the story of her grandmother and her mother, but is the story of every human being. So I began to believe that this what we share in this world, all the human beings, we may not share religions, all of us.
Yes.
We may not share the countries, the residences, I should say, or homes, shelters. But one thing that we surely share, that is the pain and agony and you see what we and experiences. So it was very beautiful how she connected her stories, rather we can say the different stages of history of her life and her mother and grandmother. And at the same time, she has been very, you see, very good in creating some historical poems. The poems are mostly historical, I think.
Yes.
And
Yes.
I was just thinking that she's as if she's relating, as if she's telling my story and of my mother and my grandmother, though we are poles asunder, but still the story almost seemed to be very similar. Though my mother was maybe younger to her mother, but she too was quite illiterate, but very much educated, we can say, and very civilized to the extent that she could understand that she should give some education to her children, though my father was not in favor of such things because he was himself an illiterate man and a laborer simply. But my mother was, you see, I can say, she was my mentor, as every mother uses to be. So the story of Betty Govindan is, I think, is everybody's story, and
Yes.
this philosophizing these stories may not be everybody's cup of tea, but as for our today's speaker, respected speaker, she has really made us very, you see, she has inspired us and we have much in common with her, all of us, all the human beings actually. And I think she must extend her. One thing I will request her, she must extend her studies up to the north of India, that is Kashmir. And we have one great saint poet, though she's a lady, late now, that is Lal Arifa or Laleshwari or Lal Ded. And one of her short poems of only 4 lines, she says that I am pulling my boat with a very, very tiny thread. And in that boat, I want to reach my home. May Allah or may God help me in reaching my home. That is, everybody in this world is living a life of, diaspora, I think. And everybody is facing a sort of diaspora, and everybody is facing a sort of apartheid at the hands of our own human beings, at the hands of our own, you can say, kith and kin. But anyhow, we have to live with all these things, and that is the greatness of great people who live with all these things without any, you see, without any, what should I say, without criticizing anybody, without saying anything against anybody, but enduring pain. That is the common thread, that is the common point that all human beings hold. And lastly, I must thank again Professor Giri Saab, Minati ji, and others who have arranged this lecture. I'm really inspired. Thank you, all of you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And our Masood Bhai is from Kashmir, and,
Yes.
and he is also a professor of literature and principal. Very quickly before we conclude, so let us invite Dr. Daisy. Dr. Daisy has left, no? And Dr. Charts, can you please open your video? We would like to see you, please.
Can you see me now?
Yes, lovely and nice to have you. We would like to invite you to our forum and listen to your work soon. So you can kindly, give us your email and WhatsApp number through Betty. So very kind of you. So where are you teaching, Dr. Charts, please?
I'm at a university in South Africa, in Pretoria. That it was the central part of the town. I grew up in KwaZulu-Natal, and Prof. Betty did the very text that she referred to in her presentation, Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart, was the text that I was in class with, and that's the one that she lectured to us on. So I remember that opening very well, and it's a text that's stuck with me throughout my life, actually. It's one of the seminal works. So I remember that so well. She brought back some lovely memories when she did reference that, at that point. And it was such a beautiful piece, and she did it so well in class. So, and as Daisy said, Prof. Betty is one of our mentors, that we have a phenomenal scholar and someone with great depth, and we always look to her for guidance. So, yeah, I'm based, as I said, in Pretoria. My research focus at the moment has shifted. I'm now looking at largely what's gone on in amongst the diaspora community, particularly in the area of music. My dean is looking at dance, and I'm looking at music. We just felt that there isn't enough that's been written about it. getting people's stories. And we decided to embark on that as our research project, over and above the few works that are already in the public domain in South Africa. So that's my focus at the moment. Actually, I will be in India in the first week of July. I'm teaching at Chandigarh University. I've been invited to do a lecture series for them, also on my work and the research that I've been doing. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. I just passed by University of South Africa, UNISA, last November, assisted by a friend who teaches in anthropology. So I have visited your library. It was a kind of a holiday, but I could still visit your library. Thank you. So slowly we are coming to a provisional conclusion. Minati? Yes.
Thank
And,
you. Yeah, please.
Professor Devrup also plays music, and he plays the bansuri. And there are many occasions in which he has kindly traveled across the country to come to accompany me when I offered my poems, and he played the bansuri. We could do that on another occasion, but he will be able to give you a fascinating story of his own journey. And so would Professor Daisy Pillay. She had to leave, unfortunately, but she works in art, in curriculum and teaching and life history, and a whole mix of modules. She'll also be able to give you very good insights from different perspectives. And I also mentioned Professor Hiralal. Unfortunately, she was planning to attend it tomorrow. I had misread the date. It was for today and not tomorrow. But she'll be able to speak on women in the struggle. She's written 3 volumes on it. And so I'll give you her details as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Anantabhai, can we conclude?
Yes.
Thank you,
Yes.
Minati.
Yeah, it was nice to see Master Yashub sir after so long. I mean, I didn't know he's there online. I thought somebody else. So, thank you all. I, Minati Pradhan, on behalf of Shraddha Chakra and Vishwaneedam Center for Asian Blossoming, would like to thank our today's speaker, Dr. B.T. Govindan, for her very insightful presentation. Thank you so much, ma'am. I also would like to thank Professor Charles Debarup, Professor Purnima Jain, Professor Daisy Pillai, Dr. Susri Sangita Misra, Professor Mashur Yashub sir, Sandhya Giri, then Ashish Gupta, and the people who were present in our Facebook platform, in our YouTube platform, and along with us. Please pardon me if I have forgotten anybody's name, but I thank all of you for being present with us and hoping to continue this learning journey together. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And thank you again to Professor Anantagiri. Thank you.
Thank you.